On the night I was supposed to propose to Elara, she chose her ex over me. But her best friend Willow said, "If she doesn't want you, then I do. You think you know someone after 3 years together? You think you've built something real? Something worth fighting for?" Had the ring, the plan, the perfect moment, all mapped out. But while I was preparing to give Elara everything, she was secretly rebuilding her life with someone from her past. The night that was supposed to change our lives forever became the night everything fell apart. In front of our families, our friends, everyone who believed in us, she made her choice. It wasn't me, but sometimes the person who's been there all along is quietly supporting you, caring for you, seeing your worth when others don't. Sometimes they're the one you should have chosen from the beginning. Sometimes the biggest heartbreak leads you to the love you never knew you needed. Before we jump back in, tell us where you're tuning in from. And if this story touches you, make sure you're subscribed because tomorrow, I've saved something extra special for you. 2 weeks before I planned to propose to Elara at the annual Moonlight Festival in downtown Brookhaven, everything changed. I had spent months coordinating with the festival organizers to reserve the perfect spot near the fountain where we'd had our first official date 3 years ago. The ring was sitting in my desk drawer at home, a stunning emerald-cut diamond that had taken me 6 months to save for while working double shifts at the architectural firm. But that Tuesday morning, Elara forgot we were supposed to meet the wedding planner to discuss potential venues for our future ceremony. Instead, she drove 2 hours to Millfield Airport to pick up someone I thought was permanently out of our lives, Reese Valagard. I waited at Harmony Wedding Boutique from 10 a.m. until 3 p.m., surrounded by white lace and crystal chandeliers, feeling increasingly foolish as the wedding consultant kept asking where my fiancé was. The only explanation I received was a photo posted in our college alumni group chat by someone who didn't realize the implications of what they were sharing in the picture. Elara was standing outside the airport terminal, her arms wrapped around Reese in an embrace that lasted far longer than a friendly hello. She was wearing the blue sundress I'd bought her for her birthday last month, the one she said made her feel beautiful. Reese looked exactly the same as he had in college, tall, confident, with that easy smile that had always made me feel like I was competing for attention whenever he was around. But what really hit me was Elara's expression. She was looking up at him with a brightness in her eyes that I couldn't remember seeing directed at me in months, maybe longer. "Dude, why did you post this?" Someone wrote in the group chat. "Caspian's in here too." "Oh shit, my bad. Deleting now," came the quick response. But I had already screenshotted it. I sat in my car outside the wedding boutique, staring at the image, trying to understand how I'd gotten to this moment. How had I become the boyfriend who was waiting alone at wedding venues while my girlfriend was reuniting with her ex? Valagard, the name still left a bitter taste in my mouth after all these years. He'd been Elara's first love during our junior year at Crestwood University. They'd been the campus power couple. He was student body president and captain of the debate team, while she was editor of the literary magazine and president of the environmental club. Everyone expected them to get married right after graduation, but Reese had different plans. He'd gotten accepted to a prestigious graduate program in international relations at Oxford and decided to pursue his dreams across the ocean. The night before he left, I'd seen Elara crying in the library, where she thought no one would find her. I'd offered her my jacket and a cup of coffee from the 24-hour cafe, and somehow that small gesture had led to our first real conversation. Elara had told me that night how Reese had said he needed to explore his potential before settling down, how he'd promised to keep in touch, but suggested they stay open to possibilities while he was away. She'd been devastated, and I'd been the shoulder she'd cried on. 6 months later, when Reese's social media showed him with a British girl named Penelope, Elara and I had started dating. I'd told myself I was helping her heal, but the truth was I'd been attracted to her long before Reese had ever left. She was brilliant, passionate about sustainability and social justice, and had this way of listening that made you feel like you were the most important person in the world. Now, 3 years later, I was the one planning to propose. And Reese was back. I tried calling Elara, but her phone went straight to voicemail. I sent a text asking if she was okay, and where she was. Hours passed with no response. Finally, at 7 p.m., I got a message. "Sorry, babe. Emergency situation with an old friend." "Rain check on today?" "An old friend?" Not even the courtesy of using his name. I drove to our shared apartment in the Riverside district, hoping to find her there so we could talk about whatever was happening. Instead, I found the place empty except for a note on the kitchen counter, "Gone to help Reese settle in. He's had some complications with his housing situation. Back tomorrow. Love you." Ia crumpled the note and threw it across the room. Complications? With his housing situation? Since when was that our problem? Since when was that her responsibility? I spent that night lying awake, staring at the ceiling, trying to convince myself I was overreacting. Maybe it really was just about helping an old friend. Maybe I was letting my insecurities get the better of me. But deep down, I knew something fundamental had shifted. The woman I'd been planning to propose to had just dropped everything, including me, the moment her first love reappeared. The next morning, I woke up to find Elara still wasn't home. Her side of the bed was untouched. When I checked Instagram, there was a new story posted from her account, a photo of 2 coffee cups at Grindstone Cafe downtown. With the caption, "Catching up on lost time," I recognized one of those cups. Was her usual order, oat milk latte with an extra shot of vanilla. The other was black coffee, no sugar. Reese's old order that I somehow still remembered from college. That's when it hit me. I wasn't just competing with Reese for Elara's attention anymore. I was competing with the memory of who she used to be when she was with him, a version of herself that she apparently missed enough to abandon our life together at a moment's. Notice I got dressed and drove to work. But I couldn't concentrate on the blueprints for the new community center project. All I could think about was that ring sitting in my desk drawer at home, and how naive I'd been to think that. What we had was strong enough to withstand the return of her first love. What I didn't know was that someone had been watching this whole situation unfold with growing concern. Someone who knew both Elara and me better than we knew ourselves, and who was about to play a role in my life that I never could have anticipated. But that revelation was still days away. And first, I had to survive the destruction of everything. I thought I knew about love, loyalty, thought, and the woman I'd planned to marry. To understand how everything fell apart, you need to know how it all began. Crestwood University 4 years ago was where our paths first crossed in ways that would shape everything that followed. I was a quiet architecture major who spent most of my time in the design studios, working on projects that nobody else seemed to care about. I transferred to Crestwood as a sophomore after my family moved from Sacramento for my dad's job at the regional planning office. Being the new guy meant I didn't have the established friend groups that everyone else seemed to have built during their freshman year. Elara was different. She was the kind of person who commanded attention without trying, not because she was loud or dramatic, but because when she spoke about something she cared about, you couldn't help but listen. She had this way of making environmental policy sound like poetry and turning discussions about sustainability into passionate calls to action that actually made people want to change their behavior. Reese was her perfect match, at least on paper. He was everything I wasn't confident, politically connected. He's the kind of guy who could walk into any room and immediately become the center of conversation. His father was a senator, his mother was a federal judge. Everyone assumed Reese would follow in their footsteps into politics. He had this effortless charisma that made professors love him and students elect him to leadership positions. Together, Elara and Reese were Crestwood University's golden couple. They organized campus-wide Earth Day celebrations, led student government initiatives, and seemed to have their entire future mapped out. They were featured on the university's website and in the alumni magazine as examples of student excellence. Everyone expected them to get married right after graduation and become one of those power couples you read about in political magazines. But there was someone else in this story who was watching everything unfold from the beginning. Willow Stonehaven. Willow was Elara's roommate and best friend since their freshman year. Where Elara was passionate and outspoken, Willow was thoughtful and observant. She was a psychology major with a minor in creative writing, and she had this gift for understanding people that sometimes felt almost supernatural. While Elara was giving speeches at rallies, Willow was the one who noticed when someone was struggling and needed support. Preparing and narrating this story took us a lot of time. So if you are enjoying it, subscribe to our channel. It means a lot to us. Now back to the story. I first really met Willow during my junior year, a literature elective I'd taken to fulfill my humanities requirement. She was the kind of student who asked questions that made everyone think deeper about what they were reading. When we had to partner up for a project analyzing the architecture descriptions in classic novels, she chose me, saying she wanted to understand how buildings could tell stories. Working with Willow on that project was the first time I'd felt truly heard at Crestwood. She listened to my ideas about how space and structure could influence emotion and narrative, and she helped me see connections I'd never noticed before. We spent hours in the library, not just working on our assignment, but talking about everything: our families, our dreams, what we thought we'd be doing in 10 years. "You know," she said one afternoon, as we were wrapping up our research, "you have this way of seeing beauty in ordinary things. Like, you'll point out how the light hits a stairwell, and suddenly I'm seeing it completely differently." That comment stuck with me. Probably because it was the first time anyone had described something about me as a gift rather than just a quirky interest. But Willow was Elara's best friend, and Elara was with Reese, so our friendship stayed within those boundaries. Willow would wave when she saw me on campus, sometimes stop to chat about our shared literature class, but we both understood that our lives were on separate tracks. Everything changed the night Reese left for Oxford. I'd seen Elara crying in the library, not the main study area where people might notice, but in the basement stacks where she thought she could fall apart in private. She was sitting on the floor between the philosophy and sociology sections, clutching her phone like it might bring Reese back if she held it tight enough. "Hey," I said softly, not wanting to startle her. "Are you okay?" She looked up with red, swollen eyes. "He's really gone." I mean, I knew he was leaving, but I didn't think he'd actually... We were supposed to figure it out together. We had plans. I sat down across from her and offered her my jacket because the basement was always freezing. "What happened?" "He said he needs to explore his potential before settling down." She laughed bitterly. 3 years together, and apparently I'm something he needs to settle for, not something worth building a life around. We talked until the library closed, not about Reese, but about everything else: her environmental science thesis, my senior design project, what it felt like to have someone you trusted make you feel like an afterthought. When security finally asked us to leave, I walked her back to her dorm. "Thank you," she said, at the entrance to Willowbrook Hall. I didn't realize how much I needed someone to just listen tonight. What I didn't know until much later was that Willow had been watching from their third-floor window. She'd seen us talking on the steps, seen the way Elara's shoulders had finally relaxed for the first time in weeks. Later, Willow would tell me that was the moment she knew Reese had made the biggest mistake of his life. Over the next few months, Elara and I kept running into each other. At first, it was coincidental: the coffee shop between our buildings, the campus shuttle stop, study groups for our shared environmental policy elective. But gradually, those encounters became intentional. We'd meet for coffee, work on assignments together, attend campus events as friends. Willow was always part of these interactions. She'd join us for movie nights, study sessions, and weekend trips to the farmer's market downtown. The three of us became an unexpected but comfortable trio. Willow had this way of making everyone feel included and understood, and she seemed genuinely happy that Elara was healing from the heartbreak Reese had left behind. 6 months after Reese left, when his Instagram started featuring photos with Penelope, stunning British literature student, Elara finally admitted that she was ready to stop waiting for someone who had clearly moved on. I think she said one night, as the three of us were watching movies in Willow's dorm room, "I've been holding on to something that was never as real as I thought it was." "What do you mean?" Willow asked, though I could tell she already knew. Reese and I, we looked good together on paper. We had the same goals, the same backgrounds, the same 5-year plan. But when I think about who I actually am when I'm happy, it's not with someone who sees me as part of his political strategy. It's with people who see me as me. She looked at me when she said that last part, and something shifted in the room. A possibility that had been quietly building for months suddenly felt real. 2 weeks later, Elara and I had our first official date. Willow helped her pick out what to wear and gave me a pep talk about being myself instead of trying to be what I thought Elara wanted. What I didn't understand then was that Willow had been rooting for us from the beginning. Even when she had feelings, she was keeping buried deep inside her own heart. Even when being our biggest supporter meant watching from the sidelines as the two people she cared about most fell in love with each other, but that truth wouldn't surface until everything else had fallen apart. Elara and I dated for 3 years. But if I'm being honest, our relationship was built more on compatibility than on the kind of consuming passion you read about in novels. We worked well together, like two puzzle pieces that fit but weren't necessarily meant for each other from the beginning. After graduation, we both ended up in Brookhaven for practical reasons. I got a position at Morrison & Associates, a mid-sized architectural firm that specialized in sustainable community development, exactly the kind of work I dreamed about since my sophomore year. Elara landed a job with the Brookhaven Environmental Council, coordinating education programs and policy advocacy. On paper, we were the perfect young professional couple, building careers that complemented each other's values. Our families loved the arrangement. My parents, who had always worried about my introverted nature and my tendency to get lost in my work, were relieved to see me with someone as socially confident as Elara. "She brings out the best in you," my mother would say whenever we visited for Sunday dinners. "You smile more when she's around." Lara's parents, both professors at the State University, appreciated that I was stable and goal-oriented. Her father, Dr. Richard Silverton, taught political science and often told people how impressed he was that I could discuss urban planning policy intelligently. Her mother, Dr. Catherine Silverton, was a sociology professor who seemed to approve of my grounding influence on Elara's sometimes impulsive activism. "You to balance each other beautifully," she would say. "Elara has the passion, and Caspian has the practical mindset to help make her dreams achievable." But that balance, I realize now, was also our fundamental problem. I was the practical one who planned our dates, managed our budget, and remembered to pay bills on time. Elara was the passionate one who inspired me to care about issues beyond my immediate concerns and pushed me to think bigger about how my work could impact communities. We complemented each other, but we didn't ignite each other. Our relationship settled into comfortable patterns quickly. Friday movie nights at our apartment in the Riverside district, Saturday morning farmers market visits where Elara would buy ingredients for elaborate meals she'd cook while I worked on freelance design projects. Sunday brunches with friends, where we'd present as the stable couple everyone expected us to become. Willow was part of these routines too. She'd moved to Brookhaven after graduation to pursue her master's degree in counseling psychology at Brookhaven State University, and she remained Elara's closest friend. She'd join us for movie nights, bringing homemade cookies and insights about whatever film we were watching that made me see layers I'd missed. She'd accompany us to the farmer's market, helping Elara select produce while listening to my probably boring explanations about how the market's pavilion structure was designed to maximize natural light and air circulation. "You two are so different," Elara said one Saturday as we walked home, Willow having split off to visit her own apartment across town. "She notices everything about people, and you notice everything about places. It's like you see the world through completely different lenses." I remember thinking that was an odd comment at the time, but I didn't examine why. The truth was, our relationship worked because it was easy. We rarely fought because we approached conflicts rationally. We shared values and long-term goals. We made each other laugh and supported each other's careers. When people asked if we were happy, the answer was always yes, because we were. It's in a comfortable, sustainable way. But there were signs that something deeper was missing. Signs I chose to ignore because acknowledging them would have meant admitting that good enough wasn't actually enough. Elara never looked at me the way she'd looked at Reese in those old college photos. I told myself that was because what we had was more mature. It's more realistic than the intense but ultimately unsustainable connection she'd had with him. But sometimes, I'd catch her scrolling through social media with a distant expression, and I'd wonder what she was thinking about. I never felt that desperate, all-consuming need to be with her that people described in love songs and movies. I loved spending time with her. I respected her. I enjoyed our physical relationship, but I could also easily spend a weekend absorbed in a design project without missing her presence. I told myself that was healthy independence, not emotional distance. Our conversations were intellectually stimulating but rarely deeply personal. We talked about work, current events, our shared interests in sustainability and community development. But we didn't often share our fears, our deepest dreams, or the parts of ourselves that felt vulnerable and uncertain. The decision to propose wasn't sparked by overwhelming romantic impulse. It was the logical next step. We'd been together for 3 years. We were both financially stable. Our families expected it, and we worked well as a team. When I started shopping for rings, it felt like checking another item off a reasonable timeline rather than taking a leap of faith toward a future I couldn't imagine living without. I chose the ring based on what I thought she'd like. Elegant, classic, environmentally responsible sourcing, rather than because it reminded me of a specific moment when I knew I wanted to marry her. Because there hadn't been one of those moments. There had just been the gradual accumulation of evidence that we made sense together. Willow was the one who helped me plan the proposal, actually. When I mentioned wanting to do something meaningful at the Moonlight Festival, she immediately suggested the fountain, where Elara and I had our first official date. She loved that, Willow had said, though her smile seemed a little forced. It's romantic and personal, but also public enough that she'll feel celebrated. Do you think she'll say yes? I'd asked, suddenly needing reassurance from someone who knew Elara better than anyone. Willow had been quiet for a long moment before answering. I think Elara cares about you deeply, Caspian. You make her feel safe and supported in ways that are really important. It wasn't exactly the ringing endorsement I'd been hoping for, but it felt honest. Honesty was what our relationship was built on, even when it wasn't particularly passionate. What I didn't realize was that safe and supported wasn't enough when faced with the return of the person who had made her feel electric, unpredictable, and fully alive. What I didn't understand was that some people need security and stability, while others need to feel like they're part of something larger and more intense than themselves. And what I couldn't have predicted was that the person who understood all of this better than anyone, the person who had been watching our relationship with a mixture of support and quiet sadness, was about to become the most important person in my life. But first, everything we'd built had to completely fall apart. Reese Valagard returned to our lives on a Tuesday in October, 3 weeks before the Moonlight Festival and my carefully planned proposal. He didn't just appear, he announced his arrival like a storm system moving in, giving everyone time to prepare, but no real way to prevent the damage. The first sign was Elara's phone buzzing during dinner at Bellacorti, the Italian restaurant, where we'd celebrated every major milestone in our relationship. She glanced at the screen, and I watched her face transform in a way I hadn't seen in 3 years. The color drained from her cheeks, then rushed back as a flush that made her look younger, more vulnerable. Who is it? I asked, already knowing I didn't want to hear the answer. Reese, she said quietly, setting the phone face down on the table. He's coming back to the States for a visit. Permanently. His dissertation advisor position at Oxford fell through. And he's taking a job with the International Development Institute here in Brookhaven. She picked up her wine glass with slightly shaking hands. He wants to... catch up. The way she said those last 2 words told me everything I needed to know about how much trouble we were in that night. Elara was different. She kept checking her phone while we watched our usual Tuesday crime drama, responding to messages with a focus and urgency she rarely showed even for work emergencies. When I asked what she and Reese were discussing, she gave me vague answers about logistics and transition planning. It's nothing romantic, Caspian, she said, when I finally asked directly. We're just friends now. But he doesn't know anyone else in Brookhaven, and you know how it is when you're starting over in a new place. I did know. I remembered being the lonely transfer student at Crestwood, grateful for any familiar face or helping hand. But I also remembered how she'd looked at her phone screen when his message first came through, the catch-up. Coffee happened that Friday. What was supposed to be a quick afternoon meeting at Grindstone Cafe turned into a 4-hour conversation that stretched through dinner. Elara texted me updates. Still talking, running late, followed by so much to discuss. Getting dinner and finally home by 10. Promise. She came home at 11:30, glowing with the kind of energy I associated with her best days at work or after particularly successful environmental campaigns. "How was it?" I asked, looking up from the architectural plans I'd been reviewing while waiting. For her intents, she said, sitting on the edge of our bed and pulling off her boots. "He's been through so much, Caspian. The academic job market is brutal right now, and the breakup with Penelope was really rough on him. Plus, his dad's been pressuring him about running for city council here, but Reese isn't sure he wants to go into politics anymore." I noticed she was using his name more than necessary, the way people do when they're trying to convince themselves that frequent repetition makes something normal. "That sounds complicated," I said carefully. "It is, but it's also exciting, you know. He's at this crossroads where he gets to reinvent himself completely. I admire that kind of courage." Courage. That was never a word she'd used to describe my choices. Over the next week, Reese became a regular presence in our conversations. Elara would share updates about his apartment search, his adjustment to his new job, his thoughts about various Brookhaven neighborhoods. She started suggesting we invite him to our usual weekend activities. "He could join us for the farmer's market on Saturday," she said Wednesday night as we cleaned up after dinner. "I think you two would actually get along really well if you got to know each other." The last thing I wanted was to spend my Saturday morning watching Elara light up around her ex-boyfriend. But I also couldn't think of a reasonable objection. Saying I was threatened by him would sound petty. Saying I didn't trust his motivations would sound paranoid. So Saturday morning, the three of us walked through the farmer's market together. Reese was charming, knowledgeable about sustainable agriculture practices, and genuinely interested in my work on the community center project. He asked thoughtful questions and remembered details from our previous conversations. If I hadn't known his history with Elara, I probably would have liked him, but I did know their history. And I could see the way Elara animated around him. It's becoming more articulate, more passionate, more like the version of herself I'd first fallen for in college. When Reese praised her environmental work or asked for her opinion on policy issues, she'd straighten up and speak with a confidence that made other market-goers stop and listen. "She's amazing," Reese said to me at one point, while Elara was examining heirloom tomatoes with the intensity of a scientist. "I forgot how brilliant she is at making complex issues accessible to everyone. No wonder the Environmental Council is lucky to have her." I agreed because it was true. But I also noticed that Reese's assessment of Elara's brilliance felt different from mine. When I complimented her work, I focused on her practical achievements and professional skills. When Reese talked about her, he seemed to be describing someone capable of changing the world. The pattern escalated quickly after that. Elara started taking lunch breaks with Reese to help him navigate Brookhaven's professional network. She'd stay late at work to meet him for happy hour with mutual contacts who might be useful for his career transition. Weekend errands became opportunities to help him shop for furniture or explore neighborhoods. Each time, I was invited, but made to feel like an afterthought. "You're welcome to come, of course, but I know you have that project deadline, or you probably don't want to spend your day off furniture shopping, or it's mostly going to be boring professional stuff." The invitations were extended, but they came with built-in excuses for my absence that made it clear my presence wasn't actually desired. It was Willow who first named what was happening. We ran into each other at the campus coffee shop near the university, where she was finishing her master's program. I'd gone there to work on sketches for the community center in a different environment, hoping to escape the apartment where every surface seemed to hold reminders of Elara's increasing unavailability. "You look like you haven't slept in a week," Willow said, sliding into the chair across from me without invitation. "That obvious to someone who knows you?" "Yes?" She studied my face with the same careful attention she brought to everything. "How are you handling Reese's return?" The question was so direct it caught me off guard. Everyone else had been treating the situation like it was perfectly normal and healthy for Elara to be spending more time with her ex than with her boyfriend of 3 years. I started, then stopped. "It's complicated." "No, it's not," Willow said quietly. "It's actually very simple. Elara is choosing to prioritize someone else's needs over yours. And you're letting her because you don't want to be the jealous, boyfriend who demands she cut contact with an old friend. She was right, and hearing it stated so plainly made my chest tight. But here's what I don't understand, she continued, leaning forward slightly. Why are you accepting treatment that you'd never accept from anyone else in your life? If a friend consistently canceled plans with you to help someone else, if a colleague repeatedly made you feel like an inconvenience, if a family member made you compete for basic attention and consideration, you'd address it or end the relationship. I stared at her, realizing I didn't have a good answer. You deserve better than this, Caspian, she said softly. You deserve to be someone's first choice, not their backup plan. That conversation with Willow was the first time someone had validated what I'd been feeling but hadn't been able to articulate. For weeks, I'd been telling myself I was overreacting, that I was being insecure, that what Elara and Reese had was just friendship, and I needed to be mature enough to handle it. But Willow was right. The issue wasn't whether Elara and Reese were romantically involved. The issue was that I'd become secondary in my own relationship. I'd been so afraid of seeming controlling that I'd forgotten I had a right to expect basic consideration from the person I planned to marry. What I didn't know was that Willow's insight came from her own painful experience of watching someone she cared about choose someone else repeatedly. And what I couldn't have predicted was how much her ability to see my worth when I couldn't see it myself would soon become the foundation for something I'd never experienced before, being someone's genuine first choice. What started as occasional catch-ups with Reese quickly became a systematic dismantling of every routine, tradition, and priority that Elara and I had built together over 3 years. It happened gradually enough that each individual incident could be explained away, but the cumulative effect was devastating. The first major cancellation happened on a Thursday evening in early November. We had tickets to see the Brookhaven Symphony Orchestra perform at the Meridian Theater Tickets. I'd bought 2 months in advance because Elara had mentioned wanting to experience more of the city's cultural offerings. We'd planned to make it a special evening, dinner at Bellacourt before the show, maybe drinks afterward to discuss the performance. At 4 p.m., as I was leaving Morrison and Associates early to get ready, Elara called. Caspian, I'm so sorry, but something urgent came up with Reese. The International Development Institute is hosting a reception tonight for potential board members, and his boss basically told him his attendance wasn't optional. He doesn't know anyone there, and he asked if I could come as his +1 to help with introductions. But we have symphony tickets, I said, standing in the parking lot outside my office building. I know, and I feel terrible about it. But this could really impact his career trajectory, and you know how important first impressions are in nonprofit work. Her voice carried that breathless urgency she usually reserved for actual emergencies. Can't you take someone else? Maybe ask Willow? That suggestion stung. She was treating our evening together like a transferable appointment, rather than time we'd specifically planned to spend with each other. It's not about having someone to go with Elara. It's about going with you. I understand, and I promise. I'll make it up to you. This is just... It's really important for Reese right now. That phrase, it's really important for Reese right now, became the justification for everything that followed. I did end up taking Willow to the symphony, met me at Bellacourt, wearing a deep blue dress that made her eyes look almost violet in the restaurant's warm lighting. She listened as I explained the situation, her expression growing more concerned with each detail. She counseled on you with 4 hours' notice, Willow asked, cutting into her pasta with more force than necessary. It's for his career, I said, though the words felt hollow even as I spoke them. Caspian, I've known Elara for 7 years. Jeez. Never, not once, canceled plans with me to help someone else's career. Not even when I was applying for graduate programs and really needed her support with mock interviews. During the symphony performance, I found myself thinking about that comment. Willow was right. Elara had always been reliable, sometimes to a fault. The fact that she was suddenly willing to break commitments for Reese suggested something had fundamentally shifted in her priorities. The pattern accelerated after that. The following week, Elara forgot about dinner with my parents, texting me at the last minute that she was helping Reese review apartment lease agreements and couldn't make it to Greenwood Hills for the Sunday meal that happened every 2 weeks without fail. My mother, who had been looking forward to sharing her latest gardening successes with Elara, was visibly disappointed. "Is everything all right with you two?" she asked quietly while we cleaned up after dinner. "Everything's fine, Mom. She's just been busy helping a friend get settled." My father, overhearing from the kitchen doorway, raised an eyebrow. That must be some friend to be more important than family dinner. 2 weeks later, it was our 3-year anniversary. I'd made reservations at Celestial, the rooftop restaurant where we'd celebrated Elara getting her job with the Environmental Council. I'd also planned to give her a preview of the engagement ring I'd chosen, thinking it might be romantic to let her see it before the actual proposal at the Moonlight Festival at 6 p.m. As I was getting dressed in our bedroom, Elara called from her office. "Honey, I'm going to be late tonight. Reese is having a crisis with his landlord. Apparently there's some issue with the security deposit and lease terms, and he needs help navigating it. No, we have dinner plans, but can we push the reservation back by an hour?" An hour became 2 hours, which became 3. At 9 p.m. she texted, "So sorry, this is taking longer than expected. Rain check on dinner? Reese really needs the support right now." I sat alone at Celestial for 20 minutes watching other couples share intimate conversations and romantic moments before finally canceling our reservation and driving home. The ring box stayed in my pocket, untouched. When Elara came home at midnight, she found me reading in bed, trying to pretend I wasn't devastated. "I'm so sorry, baby," she said, climbing into bed still wearing her work clothes. "I know tonight was supposed to be special, but Reese was really overwhelmed, and I couldn't just leave him to deal with landlord issues alone. It's our anniversary, Elara. I know, and we'll celebrate this weekend instead, I promise." But that weekend, she had to help Reese move into his new apartment. The weekend after that, she attended a professional networking event with him. Every special occasion, every routine date, every moment I'd counted on having with her became negotiable when Reese had needs. It was during this period that Willow became my lifeline. She'd text me after Elara canceled plans, checking in to see how I was handling the latest disappointment. She'd invite me to join her for coffee or lunch when I was feeling particularly isolated. She never criticized Elara directly, but she made it clear that someone in my life was paying attention to my emotional well-being. "You've lost weight," she observed one afternoon when we met at Sage in Time, the cafe near her university campus. "When's the last time you had a proper meal?" Realized I couldn't remember. I'd been grabbing sandwiches at work and eating cereal for dinner, too distracted and demoralized to cook for myself when Elara wasn't home. "Let me make you dinner tonight," Willow said. "I'm testing out recipes for Thanksgiving anyway, and I could use a guinea pig." That evening, in Willow's cozy apartment in the Artisan Quarter, watching her move around her kitchen with quiet efficiency, I felt more relaxed than I had in weeks. She made herb-crusted salmon with roasted vegetables, and we talked about everything except my relationship problems, my work on the community center, her thesis research on relationship attachment patterns, our shared love of old movies. "Is really good," I said, meaning both the food and the conversation. "You sound surprised to be enjoying yourself," she said, refilling my wine glass. I guess I'd forgotten what it felt like to be someone's priority for an evening. The comment slipped out before I could stop it, and Willow's expression grew sad. "Caspian, you should be someone's priority every evening. Or at least, you should be with someone who makes you feel valued and important, not like you're competing for basic attention." It was after that dinner that I started documenting the cancellations and disappointments. Not because I planned to confront Elara with a list, but because I was starting to doubt my own perception of what was happening. Maybe I was being overly sensitive. Maybe this was normal adjustment period behavior when an ex returns to the picture. But by the end of November, the evidence was undeniable. In 4 weeks, Elara had canceled on me 8 times to help Reese with various needs. She'd forgotten to. Important events related to my work and one family obligation. She'd been home for dinner exactly 3 times, and even during those meals. She'd spent significant portions of the conversation updating me on Reese's latest challenges or successes. Meanwhile, Willow had been present and supportive through every disappointment. She'd celebrated my small work victories when Elara was too distracted to notice them. She'd listened to my frustrations without judgment. She'd cooked for me, made sure I was taking care of myself, and treated spending time with me like a privilege rather than an obligation. The contrast was becoming impossible to ignore, though I wasn't ready to admit what it meant. I was still planning to propose to Elara at the Moonlight Festival, still telling myself that once Reese was fully settled, things would return to normal. But deep down, I was starting to understand that normal might not be enough anymore. Once you've experienced being someone's genuine priority, it becomes much harder to accept being there. Afterthought, the crisis that would force everything into the open was just 1 week away. The Moonlight Festival in downtown Brookhaven was supposed to be perfect. After weeks of Elara's distracted behavior and constant prioritization of Reese's needs, I had convinced myself that a grand romantic gesture would remind her what we meant to each other. The proposal would be a reset button, public declaration that would force her to focus on our future instead of his past. I coordinated every detail with obsessive precision. The festival organizers had reserved the space near the fountain where we'd had our first official date. My parents were driving down from Greenwood Hills. Elara's parents were coming from the university. I'd even arranged for a photographer to capture the moment discreetly from across the plaza. The ring that emerald-cut diamond I'd saved for 6 months to afford was in my jacket pocket. The velvet box worn smooth from my nervous handling. Willow knew about the proposal plan. She'd helped me coordinate the timing and had promised to make sure Elara arrived at the fountain at exactly 8 p.m. When the string quartet would begin playing our song, the same piece that had been playing in the background during our first kiss 3 years ago. She's going to be so surprised, Willow had said when we'd discussed the plan earlier that week. But her smile hadn't quite reached her eyes. There was something in her voice that I'd been too anxious to examine closely. The festival began at 6 p.m. The downtown plaza was transformed with hundreds of twinkling lights strung between lampposts, food vendors offering seasonal treats, and families strolling through the November evening despite the crisp air. Local musicians performed on multiple stages. The atmosphere was exactly the kind of magical setting I'd envisioned for this moment. At 5:45 p.m., I texted Elara, "Festival is beautiful. Can't wait to see you soon. Meet me at our fountain at 8. Her response came 20 minutes later. "Running a little late, but I'll be there. Can't wait to see what you've planned." At 6:30 p.m., my parents arrived, looking excited and slightly nervous. My mother kept adjusting my collar and asking if I was sure I had the ring safely secured. "She's going to say yes, honey," she said, squeezing my hand. "Anyone can see how much you two care about each other." Elara's parents arrived at 7 p.m. Dr. Silverton immediately began discussing the festival's economic impact on local businesses, while Dr. Silverton started analyzing the social dynamics of public celebration spaces. Their academic enthusiasm was comforting and familiar. At 7:15 p.m., I got another text from Elara. "Slight emergency with Reese, but handling it quickly. Still on track for 8. My stomach dropped, but I told myself it would be fine. Whatever crisis Reese was having, it couldn't possibly take more than 45 minutes to resolve, and Elara had confirmed she'd be there at 7:30 p.m. Willow appeared beside me near the fountain, looking beautiful in a deep green coat that complemented her dark hair. But her expression was tense. "Have you heard from Elara?" she asked quietly. "She's dealing with something Reese-related, but says she'll be here on time," I replied, though my confidence was wavering. Willow's jaw tightened. "Caspian, I need to tell you something. I saw them together this afternoon at Pinnacle Coffee downtown. They were having what looked like a very intense conversation, and Elara was crying. What about, I don't know, didn't want to interrupt, but ... double quotes. Willow hesitated. She was holding his hands across the table, both hands, and he was leaning forward like he was comforting her about something really serious. The image hit me like a physical blow. Elara holding hands with Reese, allowing him to comfort her through some crisis that she hadn't even mentioned to me. Whatever was wrong in her life, I wasn't the person she'd turn to for support. At 7:45 p.m., string quartet began tuning their instruments. Families and couples were gathering around the fountain area, anticipating whatever event was scheduled to happen. The photographer I'd hired was in position, camera ready. My phone buzzed at 7:52 p.m. "So sorry, running later than expected." Start without me if you need to. I'll find you. Start without me, as if a marriage proposal were something I could. Begin solo, and she could join when convenient. At 8 p.m. exactly, the quartet began playing our song. The melody that had once represented the beginning of our love story now felt like a funeral dirge. I stood near the fountain, surrounded by both sets of parents and dozens of strangers who were expecting to witness a beautiful moment. Holding a ring box in my pocket and staring at the plaza entrance for a woman who wasn't coming. "Wait a few more minutes," my mother asked gently, though I could hear the worry in her voice. "I'm sure she'll be here any moment," Dr. Silverton said. But she kept checking her phone as if expecting an explanation from her daughter. At 8:15 p.m., I called Elara. It went straight to voicemail. At 8:20 p.m., Willow suggested we walk around the festival while waiting. Anything to escape the growing awkwardness of our stationary vigil near the fountain. At 8:30 p.m., I finally received a call. "Caspian, I'm so sorry." Elara's voice was breathless and emotional. Something terrible happened. Reese got word that his father had a heart attack. He's okay, but they rushed him to the hospital in Capital City, and Reese is completely falling apart. I couldn't just leave him alone to deal with this. The words hit me in waves. Family medical emergency was certainly serious. But she was 2 hours away with him during what was supposed to be the most important evening of our relationship. "Elara, what about tonight? What about the festival?" I know we had plans, but this is his father, Caspian. Reese needed someone with him, and I couldn't say no. You understand, right? In the background, I could hear voices, hospital sounds, but also Reese's voice saying something I couldn't make out. "Where are you exactly?" I asked. "Capital City General Hospital." "Where?" "In the waiting room while his dad is in surgery." "When did you find out about this?" There was a pause. Around 6:30, Reese called me completely panicked, and I knew I had to help him get there safely. He was too upset to drive. 6:30, she'd known for almost 2 hours that she wouldn't be able to make it to the festival. But she'd kept texting me reassurances instead of telling me the truth. She'd let me stand there, surrounded by our families, waiting for a proposal that she knew couldn't happen. "Elara, you could have told me immediately. You could have saved me from..." "I know, and I'm sorry." I kept thinking maybe we could make it back in time, but the traffic was horrible. Then we had to help with the admission paperwork, because Reese was too emotional to handle the forms. Every word was another knife. She was describing herself as his partner in this crisis, the person responsible for supporting him through his family emergency. I was just the boyfriend she'd forgotten to properly cancel on. "When will you be home?" I asked. "I don't know. The surgery could take hours, and I can't leave Reese alone right now. Maybe tomorrow morning." "Tomorrow morning." "We's planning to spend the night at the hospital with him. Elara, we need to talk when you get back." "Course, baby. I'm really sorry about tonight. I know the festival was important to you. Important to me, not important to us." She didn't even remember that this was supposed to be our special evening together after hanging up. I stood in the middle of the festival, surrounded by twinkling lights and happy families, holding an engagement ring and trying to figure out how to explain to 4 worried parents that their children's relationship had just imploded in the most public way possible. "Son," my father said quietly, approaching with the careful tone people use around breaking glass. "She's not coming," I said simply. "Family emergency with Reese." The words hung in the air like smoke. My mother's face fell. Dr. Silverton exchanged a look that contained years of academic analysis about relationship dynamics and unspoken concerns about their daughter's priorities. Willow stepped closer, her green coat brushing against my arm. "Caspian, I'm so sorry." "Not your fault," I said automatically. "Actually," she said quietly, "I think some of it is." I looked at her, confused. I've been watching this happen for weeks, and I haven't said what I should have said. I've been too worried about preserving my friendship with Elara to tell you what you needed to hear, which is that someone who loves you doesn't repeatedly choose someone else over you, that someone who wants to marry you doesn't abandon you on the most important night of your relationship for someone else's crisis. Her voice was gentle but firm, and that you deserve so much better than this, much better than this. Standing there in the festival lights, surrounded by other people's happiness, and holding a ring that would never be worn. I finally understood what I'd been refusing to accept for weeks. Elara hadn't just failed to show up tonight. She'd made a choice about whose needs mattered more, whose emotions took priority, whose life she wanted to be part of when things got difficult. And that choice wasn't me. The ring box felt impossibly heavy in my pocket, as I realized that the proposal I'd been planning for months had already been answered, not with words, but with actions that spoke much louder. What I didn't know was that someone had been standing nearby, watching the entire devastating scene unfold, and was about to offer me something I'd never experienced before: the feeling of being someone's absolute first choice. But first, I had to survive the complete destruction of everything I'd thought I wanted. The silence that followed my phone call with Elara was deafening. Around us, the Moonlight Festival continued in full swing, children laughing as they chased bubbles from a vendor's machine, couples dancing to the string quartet's romantic melodies, families sharing funnel cake and hot cider. But in our small circle near the fountain, time seemed suspended in the worst possible way. My mother was the first to speak, her voice carefully controlled in that way parents use when they're trying not to make a bad situation worse. Well, family emergencies certainly take priority. Of course, Elara needed to be there for her friend. The word friend carried just enough emphasis to indicate that my mother wasn't entirely buying the explanation. But she was too polite to say so directly. Dr. Silverton cleared his throat, clearly struggling with the academic's desire to analyze the situation versus the parents' need to support their daughter's choices. Heart attacks are serious medical events. The stress response in young adults facing a parent's mortality can be quite overwhelming. But the timing, Dr. Catherine Silverton said quietly, then stopped herself. Even as a sociology professor who studied relationship dynamics professionally, she seemed reluctant to criticize her own daughter's decision-making in such a public setting. My father, ever one for diplomatic language, was more direct. "Son, I'm sorry to say this, but it seems like you weren't her priority tonight." The words hung in the air like a challenge that no one wanted to accept, but couldn't honestly deny. I looked around at the faces of the people who had driven hours to witness what they'd believed would be one of the happiest moments of my life. My parents, who had been so excited about gaining a daughter-in-law they'd grown to love. Elara's parents, who were clearly struggling to reconcile their daughter's usual thoughtfulness with the callousness of abandoning her boyfriend on such an important evening. I think, I said slowly, pulling the ring box from my pocket and staring at it, I think I need to accept that this engagement isn't going to happen tonight or ever. The admission felt like stepping off a cliff. For 3 years, my entire vision of the future had been built around the assumption that Elara and I would get married, buy a house, build a life together. In one phone call, that entire structure had collapsed. "Ah bien," my mother started, but I held up a hand. "She's at a hospital 2 hours away, planning to spend the night there with another man. She knew hours ago that she wouldn't be here, but she'd let me stand here waiting anyway. This isn't about a medical emergency. This is about who she chooses when she has to make difficult decisions." Willow, who had been uncharacteristically quiet during this entire exchange, suddenly stepped forward. The festival lights caught the gold threads in her green coat, and there was something different in her expression, a kind of determined clarity that I'd never seen before. "Caspian," she said, her voice carrying over the background noise of the festival. "Can I say something?" "Of course. I've been watching this situation for weeks, and I've been trying to be a good friend to both you and Elara. But being a good friend sometimes means telling difficult truths, even when they're uncomfortable." The parents all turned to look at her with interest. Willow had always been peripheral to family gatherings, Elara's quiet, thoughtful friend who was pleasant company but never the center of attention. Now, suddenly, she commanded the space with an authority that surprised everyone. The truth is that Elara has been making choices for weeks that demonstrate where her priorities lie. And those priorities haven't included the man she's supposedly planning to marry. Willow's voice was steady, but passionate. "She's been treating you like a backup plan, Caspian. Someone safe and reliable, who'll be there when she's ready to settle down, but not important enough to choose when something more exciting comes along. Dr. Catherine Silverton's expression grew troubled. As someone who studied relationship patterns professionally, she was clearly recognizing the accuracy of Willow's assessment. But here's what I don't understand, Willow continued, taking another step closer to me. Why everyone is acting like this is something that happened to you, when it's actually something that reveals who you really are. What do you mean? Asked. You spent months planning this proposal because you wanted to give Elara something beautiful and meaningful. You coordinated with festival organizers, brought both families together, chose music that represented your history together. You put thoughtfulness and care into every detail, because that's the kind of person you are. Someone who makes the people he loves feel valued and special. She paused, looking around at our small circle of family members. Elara didn't just miss a proposal tonight. She missed the chance to be chosen by someone who would have spent the rest of his life treating her like she was the most important person in the world. And that's not your loss, that's hers. The words hit me like a revelation. For weeks I'd been focused on what I was lacking that made Elara choose Reese over me. But Willow was reframing the entire situation. Problem wasn't that I wasn't enough. The problem was that Elara couldn't recognize what she had. Willow, my mother said softly. That's very kind of you to say. It's not kind, it's true. Willow turned to face my parents and the Silvertons directly. I've been in love with Caspian for 2 years. The confession exploded into the space between us like a firework. Everyone froze, including me. I've watched him be patient and supportive and endlessly considerate with someone who took all of that for granted. I've watched him doubt himself and accept treatment that he would never accept from anyone else, because he thought what he had was the best he could hope for. My heart was pounding so hard I could hear it over the festival music. But it's not, she continued, her eyes meeting mine directly. You deserve to be someone's first choice, Caspian. You deserve to be with someone who would never, ever choose someone else over you when you need them most. The festival lights seemed to dim everything except her face. I was vaguely aware that both sets of parents were watching this scene unfold with fascination, but all of my attention was focused on Willow's steady gaze. What are you saying? I asked quietly. I'm saying that if Elara doesn't want the life you're offering, then I do. Her voice grew stronger, more confident. I'm saying that the ring in your pocket represents everything I've ever wanted. Not the jewelry, but the intention behind it. The promise to build something beautiful with someone who values what we could create together. She took my hands, and I realized they were shaking. I'm saying that you came here tonight to propose to someone. Maybe the universe just made sure you found the right person to ask. The suggestion was so unexpected, so completely outside anything I'd imagined, that I couldn't immediately process it. But as the shock began to fade, something else emerged. Recognition. All those evenings when Elara had canceled and Willow had appeared to make sure I wasn't alone. All those conversations where she'd listened to my ideas about architecture and urban planning like they mattered. All those moments when she'd treated spending time with me like a privilege rather than an obligation. Willow, I said slowly, are you asking me to? I'm asking you to consider the possibility that what you thought you wanted, what you actually need, might be two different things. She smiled, and it was radiant. I'm asking you to think about whether you'd rather spend your life with someone who sees you as convenient or someone who sees you as irreplaceable. Around us, the festival continued, but our small circle had become its own universe. My parents were watching with amazement. The Silvertons looked stunned but also intrigued, as if they were witnessing a fascinating case study in human relationship dynamics. And if you decide, Willow said softly, that you'd rather be with someone who would never choose anyone else over you, then I'm hoping you might ask me the question you came here to ask tonight. The ring box in my pocket suddenly felt different, not like a symbol of a failed relationship, but like a key to a door I hadn't known existed. For the first time in hours, I smiled. Willow Stonehaven, I said, pulling out the ring box and opening it as I dropped to one knee, right there beside the fountain. Will you marry me? The festival lights reflected off the diamond as she looked down at me with tears in her eyes. Yes, she said simply. I thought you'd never ask. As I slipped the ring onto her finger, I heard my mother gasp with delight and my father's surprised laughter. Dr. Silverton started clapping. Dr. Catherine Silverton said something about fascinating relationship dynamics that made everyone laugh. The photographer I'd hired was capturing every moment, though the story these pictures told was completely different from the one I'd planned. But as Willow pulled me to my feet and kissed me in front of the fountain where Elara and I had first kissed 3 years ago, I realized that sometimes the best endings are the ones you never saw coming. The 3 weeks following our unexpected engagement were unlike anything I'd ever experienced. For the first time in my adult life, I understood what it felt like to be someone's genuine first choice. And the difference was staggering. Willow and I decided to take things slowly despite the dramatic nature of our engagement. We knew that jumping from one serious relationship directly into marriage would be emotionally complicated, regardless of how right this felt. So we agreed to a longer engagement period, 6 months, to give ourselves time to build our relationship properly. The first thing that struck me was how differently Willow approached our time together. When we made plans, she kept them. When something unexpected came up, she discussed it with me before making decisions that would affect us both. When I had important work presentations or family events, she treated them like they mattered because they mattered to me. The contrast with my previous relationship was impossible to ignore. 3 days after the festival, Willow helped me move my belongings out of the apartment I'd shared with Elara. She'd returned from Capital City the morning after the proposal, and I'd met her at Grindstone Cafe to have the conversation I should have initiated weeks earlier. "I heard about the festival," Elara said, sliding into the booth across from me with red-rimmed eyes. "Willow called me this morning." "What did she tell you?" "That you proposed to her." Elara's voice was quiet, almost numb. "But that you're engaged." "Now, yes. Caspian, I'm so sorry about last night. Reese's father is stable now, and I realize I handled everything terribly. Should have called you immediately. Should have found a way to make it work. Can we talk about fixing this?" I looked at her across the table, this woman I'd planned to marry just days earlier, and felt something I hadn't expected. Peace. "Elara, there's nothing to fix. What happened last night wasn't about one emergency or one bad decision. It was about months of patterns that showed me where I stood in your priorities. But I love you, I know you do, in your way. But love isn't just a feeling, it's a series of choices. And when you had to choose between my needs and Reese's needs, you chose Reese, every single time." She started to protest, but I continued gently. "You didn't just miss a proposal, Elara. You missed the chance to be with someone who would have spent his entire life making sure you felt valued and cherished. And I missed the chance to be with someone who would have done the same for me. And you think Willow will do that?" "I know she will, because she already has been." The conversation was painful but necessary, Elara cried, and I felt sad about it. The end of what we'd built together, but I didn't feel regret. Some relationships are meant to teach you what you need rather than giving you what you want. Moving in with Willow to her apartment in the Artisan Quarter felt like stepping into a completely different life. Her space was warm and thoughtfully arranged, filled with books and art and plants that she actually kept alive. Everything about the environment reflected careful attention to creating beauty and comfort. "I know it's smaller than what you're used to," she said as we carried my drafting table up to her spare room, which she'd immediately offered to convert into my home office. "It's perfect," I said, and meant it. Living with Willow, I discovered what a partnership could actually look like. She was genuinely interested in my work on the community center project, asking thoughtful questions that helped me think through design challenges. When I had to work late to meet deadlines, she'd bring me dinner and quietly read in the corner of my office so I wouldn't feel isolated. But more than that, she made me feel appreciated for qualities I'd never realized I possessed. "You have this way of really listening when people talk," she said one evening as we cooked dinner together. "Like you don't just wait for your turn to speak. You actually absorb what they're saying and respond to their specific thoughts and feelings. Doesn't everyone do that?" "No, Caspian, they really don't. It's a gift, and it makes people feel heard and valued in a way that's actually pretty rare." These observations weren't flattery. They were specific, accurate assessments of my character. That made me understand myself better. Willow saw me clearly, and what she saw was someone worth choosing. The physical affection between us developed naturally and felt completely different from what I'd experienced before. With Elara, physical intimacy had sometimes felt like another item on our relationship checklist, something we did because couples were supposed to do it. With Willow, every touch felt intentional and wanted. "Is this okay?" she asked the first time we kissed in her apartment, a week after the engagement. "More than okay," I said, and meant it completely. When we made love for the first time, 2 weeks later, it was with a tenderness and mutual attention that made me understand what people meant when they described physical intimacy as emotional connection made tangible. "I've imagined this for so long," she whispered afterward, her head on my chest. "Really? How long?" "Since that literature project in college, when you explained how architectural spaces can influence emotional experience. You were so passionate about the connection between environment and feeling. And I remember thinking that anyone who understood space that deeply would probably understand people the same way." She was right. And she was the first person who had ever recognized that connection. The holiday season approached. With it came the complicated reality of introducing our families to this unexpected development. Both sets of parents had witnessed the proposal at the festival, but adapting to our new dynamic took some adjustment. My mother, predictably, embraced Willow immediately. "She looks at you the way I always hoped someone would," she said during our first family dinner as an engaged couple. "Like you're exactly what she was looking for." My father was more direct. "Son, I never saw Elara look at you the way this one does. Night and day difference." Elara's parents were more complicated to navigate. Dr. Silverton and Damsu, Dr. Catherine Silverton, were clearly struggling with their daughter's choices, while also recognizing that Willow and I seemed genuinely happy together. "I hope you know, Doctor," Catherine Silverton said to me privately during our Thanksgiving dinner, "that Richard and I always thought very highly of you. Elara's decision-making doesn't reflect our opinion of your character. I appreciate that. And I hope you know that I don't harbor any ill will toward Elara. Sometimes people just aren't right for each other, even when they care about each other. That's very mature of you. Willow seems lovely. She clearly adores you." Actoids. The difference that everyone noticed: Willow didn't just love me, she adored me. She treated being with me like a privilege rather than a comfortable habit. During those first weeks, I also discovered how much emotional energy I'd been spending trying to earn Elara's attention and priority. With Willow, I never had to compete for consideration or worry that someone else's needs would automatically supersede mine. The relief was enormous. "You seem different," Willow observed one evening as we walked through the festival lights that were still up downtown, now as an engaged couple rather than as witnesses to a failed proposal. "Different how?" "Relaxed. Like you're not constantly braced for disappointment." She was right. I hadn't realized how much tension I'd been carrying. From months of wondering when I'd be canceled on, forgotten, or deprioritized. With Willow, I could make plans with confidence that they would happen. But perhaps the most significant discovery was how naturally we collaborated on envisioning our future. With Elara, discussions about marriage had always felt theoretical, like something we'd eventually figure out. With Willow, planning our life together felt immediate and real. "I've been thinking about the wedding," she said one Saturday morning as we drank coffee and read the newspaper together. About it. "I know the festival proposal was dramatic, but for the actual wedding, I'd love something smaller." "Intimate? Maybe the botanical gardens in the spring?" "That sounds perfect." I was thinking the same thing. Really? I want our wedding to be about us, not about putting on a show for other people." She smiled, and it was radiant. "See? This is why I love you. You always understand what I'm actually asking for." That night, as we lay in bed planning our future, I realized that everything I'd thought I wanted with Elara had been a pale imitation of what was actually possible.
Oh.
The difference wasn't just that Willow chose me, it was that being chosen by her felt like coming home to myself. What I didn't know was that this period of healing and discovery was about to be tested by revelations that would reframe everything. I thought I understood about how we'd gotten here. The first real test of our new relationship came in mid-December, when the Brookhaven Environmental Council hosted their annual winter gala at the Grand Meridian Hotel. as a major donor to the organization and Elara's former boyfriend. I'd received an invitation weeks before the festival proposal. Willow, as my fiancée and someone with a master's degree in psychology, was the obvious choice for my +1. "We don't have to go," Willow said when I mentioned the event over breakfast. No, seeing Elara in a professional setting might be complicated. "Actually, I think it might be good for us," I replied, surprising myself with how much I meant it. "I want to show you off, and I want to prove to myself that I can be in the same room with my past without it affecting my future." Willow smiled, but there was something cautious in her expression. "Are you sure you're ready for that?" "With you, yes." What I didn't anticipate was how dramatically the dynamics would shift when we encountered not just Elara, but Reese as well, and learned some truths that would reframe everything I thought I understood about how our situation had developed. The gala was held in the Grand Meridian's ballroom, decorated with winter greenery and twinkling lights that reminded me uncomfortably of the Moonlight Festival. Willow looked stunning in a deep navy dress that complemented her dark hair, and I felt proud to walk in with her on my arm. Caspian. The voice belonged to Maria Santos, the executive director of the Environmental Council. "I'm so glad you came. And you must be Willow," she said, extending her hand to my fiancé. "Elara has told me so much about you." The comment struck me as odd, since Elara and I had broken up over 3 weeks ago. But I filed it away as we moved into the reception area. It didn't take long to spot Elara across the room. She was standing near the silent auction display wearing a green dress that I recognized from our previous holiday parties together. But what shocked me was seeing Reese beside her, his hand resting possessively on the small of her back. "They look ... double quotes Willow began, then stopped. "Like a couple," I finished. "Like a couple." As we watched, Reese leaned down to whisper something in Elara's ear. She laughed in response, tilting her head back in a gesture of intimacy that I recognized from our early days together. The body language between them was unmistakably romantic. "How long do you think that's been going on?" Willow asked quietly. Before I could answer, Elara spotted us. Her face went through a series of expressions: surprise, guilt, defiance, and something that looked almost like relief. She said something to Reese, and they both began walking toward us. "Caspian," Elara said when they reached us, her voice carefully controlled. "I wasn't sure you'd be here." "I'm a donor," I replied simply. "Elara, you remember Willow?" "Of course." "Hi, Willow." The greeting was polite but strained. Reese extended his hand to me with that confident smile I remembered from college. "Caspian, good to see you again. Congratulations on your engagement." Elara told me the news. There was something in his tone that made my skin crawl, a barely concealed smugness that suggested he thought he'd won some kind of competition. "Thank you," I said, shaking his hand briefly. "I see you two have ... reconnected." "We have," Elara said, lifting her chin slightly. "Actually, we have some news too. Reese proposed last week." The announcement hit the space between us like a bomb. Last week, that was less than a month after she'd missed our festival proposal to be with him at the hospital. "How wonderful," Willow said with perfect politeness, though I could feel the tension in her body next to mine. "What a romantic holiday season for everyone." "It really has been," Reese agreed, his arms sliding around Elara's waist. "Sometimes you just know when something is meant to be." The comment was clearly directed at me, suggesting that what Elara and I had shared was somehow less real or meaningful than what she had with him. "Well," I said, managing to keep my voice steady, "I hope you'll both be very happy together." "We will be," Elara said, but she was looking at me when she said it, as if seeking some kind of reaction or validation. As they walked away, Willow squeezed my arm gently. "You okay?" "Actually, yes," I said, realizing it was true. "If anything, I feel ... vindicated." She proved exactly what kind of person she is. But as the evening progressed, I began to notice things that disturbed me more than Elara's rapid engagement to Reese. Several people approached us with comments that suggested they'd been expecting our breakup for weeks. "I'm so glad you found someone who appreciates you," said Dr. Jennifer Walsh, a colleague of Elara's. Honestly, some of us were wondering why you stayed as long as you did. What do you mean? I asked. It was pretty obvious that Elara's heart was elsewhere. Even before Reese came back, she talked about him constantly. We all kind of assumed she was just settling until he returned. The words stung, but not in the way I expected. I wasn't hurt by the suggestion that Elara had been settling for me. I was angry that apparently everyone had known it except me. Later in the evening, I was getting drinks at the bar when someone approached me from behind. Caspian Hawthorne. I turned to find a woman I didn't recognize, blonde, probably in her 30s, with the kind of polished appearance that suggested she worked in public relations or politics. Yes, I'm Rebecca Morrison. I work with Reese at the International Development Institute. She paused, glancing around as if checking to see who might be listening. Can I speak with you privately for a moment? Curious and slightly concerned, I followed her to a quieter corner of the ballroom. I'm not sure if I should be telling you. This, she began, but I feel like someone should know the truth about what's been happening. What truth? Reese didn't just randomly decide to come back to Brookhaven. He's been planning this move for months, specifically because he knew Elara was here. Rebecca's expression was serious, almost worried. He applied for the position at our institute specifically so he could be in the same city as her. My blood went cold. What are you saying? I'm saying this whole thing was orchestrated. Reese broke up with his girlfriend in London 3 months ago, applied for jobs specifically in this area, and has been in contact with Elara since at least September. She paused. He showed me some of their text exchanges. She's been receptive to his attention for much longer than anyone realizes. The room seemed to tilt slightly. September. That was 2 months before I'd planned to propose. Lara had been emotionally involved with Reese for months before he'd even returned. Why are you telling me this? Asked. Because Reese has been bragging about how easy it was to reclaim what was his. His words, not mine. And because he's been suggesting that your new fiancé might have had ulterior motives for pursuing you. What kind of ulterior motives? He claims that Willow has been in love with you for years, and that she somehow orchestrated the breakup between you and Elara to create an opportunity for herself. The accusation hit me like a physical blow. It's ridiculous. Is it? Rebecca asked gently. Look, I don't know any of you personally, but Reese seems very confident about his version of events. He's not usually wrong about reading people's motivations. I left Rebecca standing there and made my way back to Willow, my mind racing. The conversation had planted seeds of doubt that I hated myself for entertaining. I couldn't completely dismiss. Willow was standing by the silent auction display, examining a weekend getaway package. When she saw me approaching, her face lit up with the kind of genuine happiness that had become so familiar over the past few weeks. Find anything interesting? I asked, trying to keep my voice normal. Just thinking about honeymoon destinations, she said, then studied my face more carefully. Are you okay? You look like you've seen a ghost. Just an interesting conversation with someone from Reese's office. About what? I hesitated, not sure how to voice the accusations without sounding like I was interrogating her. Apparently Reese has been planning this move for months. He came here specifically to win Elara back. Willow's expression darkened. That's awful. So she was emotionally cheating on you for months before he even returned. Seems that way. I paused. Rebecca also mentioned that Reese thinks you've been planning things too. Planning what? Us. He thinks you've been in love with me for years and that you somehow orchestrated our relationship. Willow went very still. For a long moment, she didn't respond, and in that silence, my heart began to sink. Willow. She started, then stopped. Can we talk about this at home? Not here. The non-denial was almost worse than an outright confession would have been. As we drove home in relative silence, I found myself analyzing every interaction we'd had over the past few weeks. Looking for signs of manipulation that I might have. Missed. Had Willow been playing a longer game than I'd realized? Had my rescue from humiliation at the festival been as spontaneous as it seemed? Back at her apartment, Willow poured herself a glass of wine with shaking hands, while I sat on her couch, waiting for explanations that I wasn't sure I wanted to hear. "Reese is partially right," she said finally, not looking at me. "In love with you for much longer than I admitted at the festival? How much longer? How much longer? Since college? Since that literature project where we analyzed architecture and novels?" She turned to face me, her eyes bright with unshed tears. "But that doesn't mean I orchestrated anything, Caspian. Never interfered in your relationship. With Elara, I never encouraged her to pursue Reese. I never manipulated situations to create opportunities for myself. But you knew she was talking to him before he came back." Willow's silence was answer enough. "You knew, and you didn't tell me." "I knew she was in contact with someone from her past, yes. But I didn't know it was Reese until he arrived. And I didn't tell you because... double quotes." She trailed off. "'Cause why? Because I was hoping it would just go away on its own. Because I was afraid if I told you, you'd think I was trying to break you up. I was scared that if you knew how I felt about you, you'd stop trusting my friendship." She was crying now, tears streaming down her face. "Because I loved you both, and I didn't want to hurt either of you." I stared at her, trying to process the implications of what she was saying. "So when you spoke up at the festival, when you proposed to me, that was real, Caspian. That was me finally finding the courage to tell you how I felt. Yes, but it was also me genuinely believing that you deserved better than what Elara was giving you. But if you'd told me about her contact with her ex earlier, maybe I could have addressed it. Maybe we could have worked through it. Would you have? Really? Or would you have tried to compete with a ghost, the way you'd been doing for months?" The question hung between us like a challenge. Because she was right. If I'd known Elara was in contact with Reese, I probably would have doubled down on trying to prove I was the better choice, rather than recognizing that I shouldn't have. To prove anything to someone who truly loved me, but that didn't change the fact that Willow had withheld crucial information that might have changed everything. "I need some time to think," I said, standing up from the couch. "Caspian, please don't leave. We can work through this. Can we? Because right now I don't know what's real and what's been orchestrated. I don't know if you love me or if you love the idea of winning me from someone else." The words were harsher than I intended, but the doubt had taken root. I couldn't shake the feeling that I'd been manipulated by everyone in my life. As I grabbed my jacket and headed for the door, Willow called after me. "I never lied to you about loving you. That's the one thing in all of this that's completely true." But as I walked out into the cold December night, I couldn't help wondering if the person I thought had saved me had actually been playing a longer game than anyone else. I spent 2 days in a hotel room downtown, replaying every conversation I'd had with Willow over the past few weeks, analyzing every gesture and word for signs of manipulation I might have missed. The doubt was eating away at everything I'd thought was real about our relationship, leaving me questioning not just her motives, but my own judgment. On the third morning, my mother called. "Caspian, honey, Willow stopped by the house yesterday." "What?" I sat up in the hotel bed, instantly alert. "Why?" "She wanted to return some things to you, but mostly she seemed like she needed to talk. She was crying, sweetie. Really crying in a way that made me think she was genuinely heartbroken." "What did she say?" "That she was afraid she'd lost you by not being completely honest from the beginning. She said she understood why you needed space, but that she wanted you to know the truth about how long she's been caring about you, even when she couldn't say anything." "Mom, I don't know what to believe anymore. Can I tell you something that might help?" My mother's voice was gentle but firm. "That young woman spent 20 minutes showing me a box of things she's kept over the years, things related to you, that she never told you about. And honey, people don't fake that kind of long-term, quiet devotion." "What kind of things?" "I think you need to come home and see for yourself." An hour later, I was sitting in my parents' living room staring at a shoebox that Willow had left on their coffee table. My mother had tactfully disappeared into the kitchen, giving me privacy to examine whatever evidence Willow had wanted me to see. Inside, the box was a collection of items that spanned for years, starting from our college literature project. Were printed emails from professors about my academic achievements that she'd somehow obtained copies of. Programs from architecture exhibitions I'd participated in, carefully preserved. Newspaper clippings from when Morrison and Associates won the Sustainable Design Award last year, an achievement I'd barely mentioned to her. But it was the notebook at the bottom of the box that really undid me. It was Willow's journal from college, and it was filled with observations about me that were so detailed and caring they made my chest tight. Entries about how I'd helped a struggling classmate with a design project, how I'd stayed late to help the janitor clean up after a campus event, how I'd given thoughtful feedback on her literature papers that had helped her become a better writer. There were also entries about Elara and me, written with the kind of painful honesty that only comes when someone thinks no one will ever read. Their private thoughts. Watched Caspian and Elara at lunch today. He was telling her about his community center project, and she was clearly thinking about something else. She does that a lot, physically present, but mentally elsewhere. He deserves someone who hangs on his every word because what he has to say is actually fascinating. He sees connections between things that most people miss entirely. Elara canceled on Caspian for the third time this month to study with her political science group. I saw him sitting alone in the library afterward, working on his portfolio, wanted to approach him but didn't want to overstep. Sometimes I think I understand him better than she does, which feels disloyal to both of them. Caspian's senior project presentation was incredible. He managed to explain complex urban planning concepts in ways that made everyone in the room care about community development. Elara was there but spent most of the time checking her phone. I took notes on his entire presentation because someone should remember how brilliant he was today. The entries continued through graduation and into our adult lives. Notes about running into me at coffee shops, observations about my work that she'd gleaned from mutual friends, even printed articles about sustainable architecture that she'd saved because they reminded her of my interests. But it was the final entry, dated just a week before the Moonlight Festival, that completely demolished my doubts. Heard through Elena Santos that Caspian is planning to propose to Elara at the festival. Should be happy for them, but can't stop thinking about how Elara has been different since Reese contacted her. She's been distracted, distant. Caspian hasn't noticed because he's been so focused on planning the perfect proposal. Part of me wants to warn him, but what right do I have? I've been in love with him for 4 years without saying anything. If I speak up now, it'll look like jealousy, not genuine concern for his happiness. All I can do is hope that either Elara comes to her senses, or that Caspian eventually realizes he deserves someone who loves him the way I do, completely, consistently, without reservation. I closed the journal with shaking hands. This wasn't the record of someone who had orchestrated my breakup. This was the documentation of someone who had been watching and caring from a distance for years. Someone who had been genuinely concerned about my happiness, long before she had any reason to believe she might have a chance with me. My phone buzzed. With a text from Willow, "I know you need space, and I respect that. But I want you to know that loving you was never a game to me." It was the most real thing in my life, even when I couldn't say it out loud. I drove directly to her apartment, answered the door, looking like she hadn't slept in days, her eyes red and swollen from crying. When she saw me, her face went through a series of expressions: hope, fear, resignation. "Caspian, I saw the journal," I said quietly, "and the newspaper clippings, and the notes from my presentations." She wrapped her arms around herself, as if trying to hold herself together. "I know how it looks. I know it seems obsessive or manipulative. It doesn't look obsessive. It looks like love." I stepped closer to her. Real love. The kind that pays attention and remembers and celebrates someone else's success, even when no one's watching. You believe me? That I never tried to sabotage your relationship with Elara? I believe you, because if you had wanted to sabotage it, you could have told me about her contact with Reese months ago. You could have pointed out all the ways she was taking me for granted, could have made yourself look better by making her look worse. I reached out and took her hands. Instead, you kept quiet and let me figure it out on my own. I was terrified. You'd think I was trying to manipulate you. The manipulation was all on their end, Willow. Reese orchestrated his return specifically to reclaim Elara. She was emotionally cheating for months before he even got here. They used me as a safety net while they figured out their own relationship. I squeezed her hands. You were the only person in this entire situation who was honest about your feelings. even though I waited until the last possible moment to tell you. Especially because you waited. It's because when you finally spoke up, it was because you couldn't watch me be treated badly anymore, not because you saw an opportunity for yourself. She started crying again, but these were different tears, relief instead of heartbreak. I love you, Willow. Not because you saved me from humiliation at the festival, but because you've been loving me consistently and quietly for years without expecting anything in return. That's the kind of love I want to build a life around. I pulled her into my arms and she felt like coming home. Are we really going to be okay? She whispered against my chest. We're going to be more than okay. We're going to be happy in a way that's sustainable and real and built on actually knowing and appreciating each other. That evening, we had an honest conversation about everything. Her years of hidden feelings, my insecurities about being chosen, her fears about seeming manipulative, my gratitude for her patience and genuine care. Can I ask you something? I said as we sat curled together on her couch. Anything. In your journal, you wrote about understanding me better than Elara did. What did you mean? Willow was quiet for a moment, thinking. Elara loved the idea of you stable, successful, family-approved Caspian. But I loved the actual you. It's the way you see beauty in ordinary buildings. It's the way you listen to people like their thoughts actually matter. The way you get excited about urban planning projects that most people find boring. She looked at me, directly. I loved you for who you are, not for who you could be or what you represented. And I love you for seeing me that clearly and choosing me anyway. 3 months later, we were married in the botanical gardens, surrounded by close friends and family who had watched our entire story unfold. It was small, intimate, and focused entirely on the commitment we were making to each other as we exchanged vows that we'd written ourselves. I looked into Willow's eyes and saw my future, not the future I'd planned, but the future I actually wanted. A partnership built on mutual respect, genuine affection, and the security that comes from being someone's first choice every single day. During the reception, my father pulled me aside. Son, I've never seen you look so relaxed and happy. Because I finally understand what it feels like to be with someone who loves me exactly as I am. That's a rare gift. It is. And I almost missed it because I was so focused on trying to make something work that was never right to begin with. Later that evening, as Willow and I danced to the string quartet playing in the garden pavilion, I thought about the journey that had brought us here. Sometimes the biggest heartbreak leads you to the love you never knew you needed. Sometimes being rejected by the wrong person opens up space for the right person to finally speak up. Sometimes the best endings are the ones you never saw coming. What are you thinking about? Willow asked, her arms around my neck. Just how grateful I am that Elara chose Reese over me. Really? Because it led me to you.
And it's us.
This is what I was actually looking for all along. I just didn't know it yet. She smiled, and it was radiant. I've been waiting my whole life for you to say that. Well, now you never have to wait for anything ever again. You'll always be my first choice, Willow, in everything. As we swayed together under the garden lights, I realized that some stories don't end with getting what you want. The best ones end with discovering what you actually needed was there all along, waiting patiently for you to be ready to see it. 2 years later, life had settled into the kind of happiness that feels both extraordinary and completely natural. Willow and I were living in a house we'd designed together in the Riverside district. Sustainable home that perfectly blended my architectural vision with her. Psychological insights about how spaces affect emotional well-being. Every morning, I woke up next to someone who was genuinely excited to start another day with me. My community center project had been completed and won several awards for innovative, sustainable design. More importantly, it had become a gathering, a place that was actually changing lives in our neighborhood. Willow had opened a private counseling practice specializing in relationship therapy, and her waiting list was months long. As for Elara and Reese, their engagement had lasted exactly for months. According to mutual friends, they'd broken up spectacularly when Elara discovered that Reese had been keeping his options open with multiple women, including his ex Penelope in London.
I don't know.
The pattern of prioritizing other people's needs had finally cost Elara something she actually wanted. Last I heard, Elara was dating a fellow environmental activist who seemed to appreciate her passion for policy work. I genuinely hoped she'd found someone who valued her properly, Reese. Had moved to Washington, D.C. for a position with a lobbying firm, where his talent for manipulation was apparently considered an asset rather than a character flaw. Do you ever wonder what would have happened if she'd shown up that night? Willow asked one evening, as we walked past the fountain, where everything had changed. No, I said, taking her hand, because I can't imagine wanting anything different than what we have. She smiled, and it was radiant. Good answer. Sometimes the best love stories aren't about finding your soulmate. They're about finding the person who's been quietly loving your soul all along, waiting for you to be ready to see it. Up next, you've got 2 more standout stories right on your screen. This one hit the mark. You won't want to pass these up. Just click and check them out. And don't forget to subscribe and turn on the notification bell so you don't miss any upload from us.